Sit back, relax, and grab your virtual seat because in this episode and every other episode, I'll be interviewing and collaborating with another high-level marketing and copywriting expert. If you haven't yet, go ahead and get some help along the way as we dish out and pinpoint some of the most profitable, powerful marketing and copywriting wisdom. Get some help with implementing everything you'll hear in this episode and other episodes by downloading my personal sales funnel swipe file stash at copyblueprints.com. Now, grab your virtual seat and listen in. Anthony Clark has hopped on with us today. He's about a 20-year veteran in the marketing world, more specifically direct response marketing, with the focus on supplement, alternative health, and basically all things surrounding the health and fitness industry. Thanks for joining us, Anthony.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here.
Likewise, we worked together maybe about a year ago, and I know you had that very disciplined approach to direct response and funnel building, of course, overseeing both the creative side and the execution. But prior to that, you mentioned that before you started your 20-year journey that you actually served in the military.
Yeah, that's right. When I was young, I think I joined when I was 17 in the Canadian military as an infantry soldier, and I was there for 5 years. And while I was in the military is when I started my entrepreneurial journey. And I will say that I gained some good skills, some good insights, and a foundation of discipline and hard work from the military, but also even prior to that, growing up as the oldest of a large family, there was discipline, there was hard work. And it's also just in my nature, I'm pretty structured and organized for the most part.
It's good to bring that experience. There's going into almost any industry when you served if you have a military background, no matter what field you go in, even if it's security, hospitals, public work. I mean, having a military background is almost always, it's never a negative thing, taking it into, I guess, the civilian workforce. So how did you, because entrepreneurship, it runs in your family. So how did you kind of get your start in your first venture of marketing and entrepreneurship?
Good question. Well, that started back in 2004 when I co-founded Activation Products with my father, Ian Clark. And that business got its start because of his health journey, where he hit the wall with his health. And I was there observing that, all the way through, and was part of that starting. It was his idea, it was his journey. My involvement of that was to be the operations behind it. So he had the personal story, the personal experience, and a very good speaker and presenter, and essentially a salesperson. And then I would do all the things behind that to make sure the trains were running on time, to make sure the business is operating. And yet, so I was 19 when that started. At no point, I haven't been any college or university, I don't have any post-secondary education. A lot of that experience, which in my opinion is often superior, came from just doing it, being in it, living it, making mistakes, learning from my father, learning from other colleagues as I went through my journey. I traveled quite a bit as well, meeting people at mastermind events, marketing events, took some marketing courses, but again, not at university, just direct response stuff. Like digitalmarketer.com was one of the first places that I really sunk my teeth into the ins and outs of direct response. They're great. They really have done a lot to spread that message and getting my head wrapped around funnels. But the funny thing about, funnels as we know them, I didn't hear about that until 2011. So the business had, got its start in 2004, and there's quite a few years of product development and going to farmers markets and selling the products on a very small local level, getting a few B2B clients, going to trade shows, and it was slowly growing. And then in 2011, from one of the people that we'd met through our travels, he said, "You need a funnel." What the heck is a funnel? And away we go. So from that, I started learning about landing pages and copywriting and all of that. And at that time, I don't know what year Facebook officially opened up its platform for advertising, but I do know that for the beginning of how we started the business, there was no Facebook ads. So a lot of our traffic came from affiliates, and that's still a very valid traffic source nowadays. However, here in 2025, there's a tremendous advantage, provided you know what you're doing and you work with the right people, to scale up your traffic very quickly, especially with Facebook ads. And I've observed a few brands who have gone from zero to multiple tens of millions, like 10, 20, 30, even 50 million, almost exclusively from Facebook ads within a year. And that shows that they have tremendous skill. They have a really good team that is doing the creatives, the ads themselves. They have a really good funnel and, of course, a really good product and an offer. So it's not just one thing to point out a funnel is the thing, or the copy is the thing, or the ads the thing. It's really the whole thing that you have to skillfully assemble and deploy in order to really have a successful online e-commerce business. And of course, the product has to be good. So there's no magic one pill. It is a holistic, harmonious blend of skills that you have to bring to the table. And in my opinion, and from what I've observed, there's no such thing as one person who does it all. One person who writes, and he can design, and he can develop the code. So of course, this is a team sport, and that kind of leads into, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here, which is also it's a tripping point or stumbling block, or it's a hazard or risk to people who are coming into this industry, because you can end up hiring and working with people who don't, it's not that they're necessarily not skilled at what they do, but if you don't have the right blend of team and management of team and knowing your numbers and the tools, the software, just all those things combined, it's very easy to spend a lot of money quickly and not get fantastic results. And some of my clients are in that position where they've spent large sums of money in developing a product and the marketing and the branding and buying inventory, and not even breaking even, sometimes for a few years. But yeah, I will talk about that in a few minutes. Just to wrap up a few more points here of my journey that brought me to this moment is, so with activation, we were growing it. At its peak, it was doing about 10 million a year. And we grew it from starting in Canada and very quickly expanded into the US market. I myself moved to Australia in 2018, and that's where I am right now, near Brisbane. So I've been here for, this is my 7th year being in Australia. And when I moved here, that got me to think about, I want to sell this product in Australia. The problem is shipping it from America to Australia and other countries around the world. There is the problem of the currency issue and the shipping costs and the shipping time. So I established a small operation here with a small little team of people to manage the warehouse and do the customer support. And that was quite successful, and it's still running right now. And then from that, I thought, well, why not bring another country in? So the UK. So activation opened in the UK a few years ago. A few years ago. And the cool thing about that was that we didn't have to physically travel to the UK for any of it. We opened the company remotely, opened a bank account remotely, sent inventory to a third-party logistics or warehouse to do fulfillment. And right there, we had another access into a new market. And then I stepped away from activation in early 2024. And since then, I've been focusing on consulting and guiding, and you might call it like fractional CMO or CRO, like Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Revenue Officer, helping people who are in the e-com game. They are either new, like they haven't launched yet, or they've just recently launched, or they haven't cracked their first million. So they have a great product, they have a good idea, good brand, but they often don't know about direct response, or they're missing a lot of the key ingredients or knowledge or skills to properly set up a funnel, send the right sorts of traffic to it, and track their numbers to have a profitable business.
So you've had different facets of the different approaches of what goes into direct response, because most people, marketers, copywriters, the leading executive of a company usually sees the conversion aspect, the creatives, obviously the copy, the big ideas, the videos, the production, and then we see, the funnels. So after you spent some years doing that and you actually helped lead a team with, your father at the previous company you were involved in. So now you moved on and now you see some different angles. So you see the operations, you see what goes into e-commerce. So you started to take more of that, not necessarily evolution, but integrate that type of experience into your marketing, into your approach to marketing. So as you got on that, as you made that shift, so you began more so shifting your focus to serving other clients, right? So let's say someone comes to you, it's an agency, e-commerce, or health company. Chances are you've seen most of them encounter, maybe there's at least 1 to 3 problems you can predict they're already suffering from, right? Something that you go
Mm,
in there and you consistently need to fix. For example, copywriters need to go in there and sometimes we need to fix. Sometimes it's the funnel strategy. Sometimes it's, just rewrite part of a sales page. Sometimes it is, should you test or what's the next move? So these are things we can predict for kind of the freelancers and copywriters. But how about, your market as kind of the chief, more of a fractional chief marketing officer and helping with the revenue and the operations? What is kind of the biggest thing, one of the biggest problems you're seeing, especially lately, that it just has to be something that's just going wrong within your
mm.
clientele?
There are some reoccurring themes, definitely. And with the people I've been working with in the last 8 to 10 months, there's two camps. There's either the people who don't know anything about direct response whatsoever, so I have to introduce them to funnels and handhold them through that, and they get it, but it does take it takes hours of meetings and explaining and saying it over and over, but it does eventually land. Just like when I think back to when I first started to where I am now, how many times did I hear the word funnel and all the other KPIs that go with it? How many books have I read? How many courses have I done? How many people have I talked to? And that knowledge has been compounding. And then, of course, it gets better by application, right? So the theory is great and necessary, and then it is sharpened and refined through experience. The other type of client that I have as well is someone who's in ecom. They even have a funnel, but they need to now learn, well, how do we do conversion rate optimization or CRO? How do we get our funnel to ROI, to be profitable, or at the bare minimum to break even on acquisition? So when I'm teaching people, coaching them, and setting the strategy for them, I talk to them about in marketing, online marketing, people will often say the front end or the back end, or acquisition and ascension, meaning there's the relationship and the work that goes into acquiring a new customer, someone who's never heard of your brand, and they're often apprehensive because of the amount of ads that are out there and the amount of promises and claims, of course, which is indicative of a more sophisticated market or customer who's been there and seen it all. And then post that, after you've acquired a customer, what do you do with them? Well, we know that the game is all about lifetime value, or LTV. There's another, acronym for people to be aware of if they're not already aware of it. So I'll just start first with I'll talk to a problem that is common between both of those type of people that I'm working with,
Hmm.
which is, and I mentioned it earlier, there's a skill issue. So when you're coming into a business, there's multiple skills you have to have. And, some of those are operational, administrative, and product development and finance, but those are important. However, 80 or 90% of what a business owner needs to be spending their time on, especially when they're, small, is generating sales. You need to have cash flow. You need to have sales. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good your bookkeeping is or any of the other supportive roles, you won't have any cash to work with. So it's very important that even if you're working with somebody like myself or working with an agency, a business owner would be very wise to gain at least a basic understanding of how online marketing works, because the more you have these skills as a business owner, the better you're able to hire the right people, firstly. So it's the searching, the vetting, interviewing, and the making sure that they know what they're talking about, setting the right expectations, because it's very easy. And I have clients, current clients, who came to me after having worked with agencies, and their general complaint was, we didn't get results, we're not pleased with it, we paid X money, we got either no sales or very little sales, we're disappointed. And I think that's the responsibility of the owner, the business owner. Yes, you can point the finger at the agency or the freelancer. However, you hired them. And
Right.
granted, if you don't know what you don't know, it's very easy to just do a Google search and say online marketing or Facebook ads or whatever search they do, and they find the nearest, generic marketing agency, and they get pitched on something that sounds good. And cool, that's great. I got a nice looking PowerPoint and this sounds good.
Right.
But then months later, very little results. And even so, I've even heard people like experienced brand owners in the direct response space have even hired very skilled individuals and didn't have results. And that's more of an advanced problem where there wasn't a congruency with the team, and they didn't make sure that that person was focusing on the right things.
That's good to bring it up. I mean, not to be philosophical, but there's that mindset of, taking responsibility is the first step to, I
Mm,
mean, it's just like every area of life, right? Sports is you don't if you take responsibility for your failures and you know how to get better, because the victim mentality is never going to get you far or it can stunt your progress. And this is exact same thing in business and marketing. And it's not necessarily thick skin, but of course, you feel a victim to a failed campaign or a victim to a team that didn't work well. But that's a great point you bring up. It is that screening process of not just to feel, if it doesn't work and feeling burned, etc., that's common, but to take that due diligence ahead of time to say, I'm going to screen who I work with, I'm going to screen someone has to understand our brand, has to understand our message. We want to screen for someone who wants to work with us and vice versa. But while we're on that subject, I mean, when it comes to that diagnostic and screening process where you're, getting a feel for a new client and vice versa, what are some pointers you can give them? Because if someone's looking for someone like you or someone like me, and you were to talk to them, what would be some advice you can give them when they're looking for, a agency or a copy chief or a CMO to help them out?
yeah, that's a very good question. Well, and this will go back to what I said a few minutes ago about the more and I'm saying you as in you're the owner of a business, the more skills you have on a certain topic, the better you're able to identify a good player or a good operator that you're interviewing. And then you know the right questions to ask. You can spot red flags or inconsistencies where they're either not being fully honest, or they just don't have it. They don't have that the ability, the self-confidence, and the results, of course. Like if anybody can show you black and white results, like, hey, I let's say copywriter, because that's like one of your most important hires, or person you're going to work with, whether it's long term or it's just a one-off project. If they can easily say, yeah, look, here I've made $100 million for my clients, that's great, that's cool. That is a big green check. It's not the only check, but that helps. So that's one thing. But I'll just go back for a second, talking about skills. So I would recommend that any business owner, would start off with learning some basics. Like one book that I refer many people to is Dot-Com Secrets by Russell Brunson. And there's many other that are out there. There's stuff written by Dan Kennedy that's great. You can read Breakthrough Advertising. But just for like a good basic foundational understanding of what is a funnel and direct response and some funnel strategies, I always recommend direct response to people who are starting out. And I still check and refer back to it periodically. One thing I've done with my clients is I've stepped in to help them find those right people. And the advantage I have is that, one, I have a lot of experience, so I'm fairly good at hiring people. And two, I already have an existing network. So with my existing clients, I've found out what they need, wrote up the strategy for them, and said, okay, you need this person. for copy and this person for design and dev and ads and etc. I mean, it's not always the exact same people with every client. It depends on their budget and also them clicking. So that is actually a pretty good point. And I've heard this from quite a few people. And Tim Ferriss is the most memorable one that I remember him saying is, and he was talking in the context of whether he invests in a project or not. But it would apply as well, I believe, to working with people on a project. Do you enjoy working with them? And his specific quote was, if I don't want to go and have if I don't want to go on vacation with them for a week, if I'm not going to enjoy being with them on a more casual or personal level, then it's kind of a big risk to engage with them on a commercial level. And
Yeah,
I do prescribe to that.
it's that kind of date before we marry concept. I think for any freelancer or someone looking for freelancers, fractional CMOs are also freelancers, and conversion
Mm,
rate, copy chiefs for hire are all freelancers. It is that date before we marry process where it's taking the diagnostic approach of, do my needs fit in with their expertise, but it's also that screening each other as we go. Are we going to get results within the first few weeks? Are we making sure we both like each other and not keep it one-sided? Because sometimes there are a lot of moving parts. Sometimes they do need the copy, or sometimes they have a team that needs to step it up, or they have a bunch of stuff on their plate, a partnership that's on hold, affiliates that didn't get on board, deprioritization. So it is that the initial process is always kind of going to be a date before we marry thing, but that's where both experience and screening comes into play. And that's one thing you mentioned before, that copy chiefs, CMOs, copywriters, one thing that we don't always encounter that you had mentioned prior was kind of conquering or preventing burnout. And I thought that was interesting how you said it's kind of something that you run into a lot, which is noticing the executives or the leaders are kind of hitting a burnout or feeling overwhelmed, which could be a different problem in and of itself. So if you're dealing with an executive or like a marketing director, and they're feeling like overwhelmed and burned out, these are like emotional symptoms that you have to diagnose that problem. Uh, how do you usually handle that? Because sometimes it could be they're overwhelmed because they have too much to do, or they don't know how to, what the next step is, or they just dump their marketing budget on the wrong thing. But how do you kind of deal with that? Because that's not something all freelancers, no matter what your specialty is, are prepared to handle, is when your client is dealing with burnout. Because
mm. Yeah. So burnout, another way to say it would be they're, what's another word for it? It's not always necessarily strictly burnout, but they are getting uh, fatigued and exhausted by all the decisions they have to make. And they have this vision in their mind. I want to have $1 million a year business or whatever number, 5 million, 10 million. And they have only so much capacity of hope and expectation and trust and faith in the entire operation before they start to lose their wind. And of course, like having how much capital they have in the business is also a pretty big factor of that. Because if you just don't have the money to get the job done, that's an immediate barrier. And I've seen that as well, like undercapitalized e-commerce businesses, like physical product businesses, that's a serious problem. If you have, instead of burnout, if you've got someone who's super excited and keen, but if they don't have the resources, well, you're gonna have the same result. You're not going to go anywhere. But specifically to deal with burnout or overwhelm, creating clear prioritization or like, what are we working on now? Or like I learned this from there's a book called The One Thing, and based on the title, you kind of get an idea of it. But what is the one thing such that by focusing on it or completing it will make other things irrelevant or unnecessary? That's essentially the main thesis of that book. And the way you look at that is saying, well, I know where I want to go. Like, what's my big goal? And then how do I break that down? And then what specific things do I need to get done? Because if you don't have the ability to do that yourself, having a coach or a mentor or a consultant like myself and other people who do this is really beneficial because I've seen this. I've I've been on calls with clients that 90% of the call was really a counseling session. It was helping them relieve their worries and anxieties and stress, not by telling them sweet nothings, but by letting them speak and then calmly and authoritatively saying, we need to focus on this. Don't get distracted by all these cool ideas and shiny objects. And also don't get distracted by your own fears and apprehensions like, I've been at this for X amount of time and I spent Y amount of money and why isn't it working? Those are true factors, but we're not going to look at it from the frame of victim and woe is me. We're going to say, well, I mean, the money's spent and the time is gone. What can we do now? Let's get back to basics. And the basics and the foundations are always the same. When you're selling e-com products, you need to have obviously a good product. You need to have a good brand, meaning the name, the aesthetic, the packaging does matter. It doesn't matter to the point where it needs to be world class initially because activation was started with very basic uh, brand. Like it wasn't even called activation at the beginning. And the packaging was so basic, I actually did it myself. I was the in-house graphic designer, and it was like high school level quality of design, like super, super, super simple. The product was so good, and Ian was also and is still an incredibly good salesperson that we still succeeded in spite of the brand not being particularly strong. So you got your product, your brand, and your marketing. So now we're talking funnel, copywriter. And I've seen companies do exceptionally well with just, the basics in place without any fancy website, just a straight up funnel, and you send the right people to it and you start getting sales. And then, of course, you're learning from that and you're improving the funnel and you're reinvesting in the business. And then you can just keep growing and preventing distractions. And it's like keeping your mind clear. This would be one of the how a business owner prevents themselves from self-sabotaging or being sabotaged by business partners, investors, and team members, or anybody that's in their ear, is they have to keep very focused on where am I going, how am I getting there, and what are the basics, the fundamentals that I'm doing continuously. We have a website, which is the online equivalent of a shop. So if you're to take it to the offline physical world, I'm opening a bakery. I've got a physical bakery. Cool. That's my funnel or that's my sales page. And I need ads to make people know I exist. Now, some of them are going to walk by the shop and just walk in. That's like organic traffic, but you don't want to rely on that as your source of inflow traffic. So you need ads, which is billboards and however else people they get them in. And then once they're in, the presentation of the shop, that's your actual funnel. And then how well it converts is a consequence of how well you've merchandised and presented, and also your customer service. This is something that is not to be overlooked, is that you want to make sure that your customers are having a fantastic experience. It's also called CX, customer experience, which starts, of course, with the sales page, and make sure that the ability to, if you can do it, I highly recommend making it very obvious and easy to find your phone number so that people can call, putting live chat on your website if you can, being very prompt and responsive with your email. And that starts the relationship with the customer. And then, of course, you want to continue that throughout the life of the customer. But to summarize it, the problem of being overwhelmed and not knowing what to do next, very much beneficial for a business owner to work with someone who can help them get that priority and that strategy. Because if the strategy isn't sound, then they can be as diligent and focused on doing something, but they're not going to get anywhere. It's like we need a map that's accurate and a compass that's accurate. We need to know where we're going. Because there's a joke on this. It's like some guys in the forest are cutting trees, loggers, and the manager climbs up a tree and checks and sees where they're going, and he says, "Guys, you're going the wrong way. Like you're cutting the wrong direction according to what their cutting plan was." And they yelled back to him, "Yeah, but we're making great time." So going faster in the wrong direction doesn't help.
That's important though too, because sometimes when you do come on to, even just on a consulting level, when you're talking to, like you say, a marketing executive, sometimes they have these ideas of things that want to be improved, initiatives, redoing copy, the website, launching new products, events, all sorts of cool things they're working on, or partnerships. But it is that prioritization. Sometimes they have these little tiny things that are just really slowing them down. And sometimes they do get a separate coach, a mindset coach, then they try to find someone to help them deal with logistics. And to be able to sometimes that the what's hindering the production of the copy, the creatives, and the execution, the revenue and sales generation activity, sometimes it is this little cog in the machine. There's people who've been stuck on what kind of software do I use? Is this they're hung up on project management, or like you said, they get mindset coaches and stuff to help them with burnout. But it's good to be able to diagnose these things and be able to handle these little cogs in the system that are slowing things down, because it's a shame that there's these revenue generation activities only to find out the leaders of the company are caught in minute things. So it's good to kind of unravel that. But let's talk a little bit more about, so because ecom has kind of a different set, not necessarily a different set, but there's some specific I guess some specific, nuts and bolts that need to be tied in that are specific to ecom versus, let's say, info marketing.
Mm.
Uh, what is so if you're, let's say someone comes to you who owns ecom, let's say health and beauty ecom. They're selling, yeah, just like health and beauty ecom in general. If they're,
Mhm.
what are one of the first things you look for, or you're diagnosing for them, that's more specific to ecom versus, say, info marketing, or one of the first questions you ask them that's more specific to ecom versus other niches?
Yep. All right. And I am quite specific on e-com physical products, or also called consumer packaged goods, CPG. So I don't have a lot to say about info. With e-com, I immediately ask them some questions about the product, in particular the cost of the product, or also called cost of goods sold, or COGS, COGS. That is crucial. Excuse me. In fact, it is one of the first things I ask. And as I'm working more and more with clients, and I've always done this, which is I create spreadsheets to analyze, like to create scenarios, forecasts, like a funnel calculator. I've custom built my own, internal version of that I use on a Google spreadsheet, and I plug in the numbers and I say, okay, well, once I know your costs, that's great. And I look at it and I think, well, is that the best price they can get? Is that based on a low order quantity, or what's called a minimum order quantity, MOQ? And I think, okay, well, that's fine if they're just starting out, because you don't, you're not often able to, and you don't even want to usually order, let's say 20 or 50 or 100,000 units of something, because you haven't validated the business. You want to order something small. The problem with that, of course, is that the cost per unit, or COGS, is going to be higher, and that has a significant impact in the feasibility and the profitability of your offer, because the more that the product costs, the more that's going to make it harder to be profitable, because you have to consider your ad spend and how much your ad spend versus your revenue. There's a phrase called return on ad spend, or ROAS, ROAS. So I input the cost of the product, and I say, well, what's the recommended retail price, or RRP? And for anyone listening, you're starting to notice a pattern here. There's a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of jargon, or like, these phrases that we're using, and uh, and that's just how it goes. But once you learn those things, you start to see how it all the whole picture falls together. So starting with COGS and then RRP, and what I'm looking for in the ideal world is a markup between the COGS and the RRP of 8x. Meaning, if you bought something, if your cost is $10, I'd like to set the retail price to 80. Now, that's not always feasible depending on the market and the product. Like, if the market itself won't bear that price, especially in relation to your competitors, if you want to sell it for 80, but your competitors are all selling it for 40, you can price higher, you can price premium. However, there is a limit. And then that leads you into doing some competitor research, market research. What will the market bear? My first point of reference, or research for market research or competitor research is always Amazon. And it's not the only place I go, but it's the first place I go just to get a gauge of the landscape of other products that are selling similar to that, what the price points are. Again, it's not perfect because Amazon prices can sometimes be haywire, but it's very good to go check how are things selling on Amazon, because you're not going to it's like one place to see a lot of things in one place, so you can quickly see them in relation to each other. So that markup, what I call markup X on my spreadsheets, is very important. Like if it's only 3X, it's going to be hard. It it can work if it's a higher ticket item, meaning it's $200, $300 product. Well, that might work depending on how much you're going to end up spending on advertising per new order. So I start with that, and then with my sheet that I've already got some known, we call them benchmarks. Like these are known factors that it's probably going to cost this much for advertising or ROAS. And usually we're aiming for like a 2 to 3 ROAS. So for every dollar we're putting on ads, we're hoping and expecting to get $2 to $3 back in revenue. But I don't just stop there. I then say, and I find out from the client, all right, we don't just want to know ROAS because that can be a misleading number. Because you have a physical product, you have to consider the cost of inventory and the cost of shipping and handling, cost of payment processing. And often when you're working with a copywriter or an ad agency, they will usually want to get a piece of the action. They want some commission. So then I have a line in there for commission. Because this is the thing I've seen quite a few people do when they're looking at data and they haven't done a full holistic analysis, either because they don't know or because they don't want to know because it's too scary to think about, is, well, I just got a new order. Great. I've got $100 order. I've sold $100 worth of stuff. But what of that $100 do I have to pay out to fulfill it, to fully complete the transaction? So I had to pay Facebook however much, let's say if you get a ROAS of 3, well, I paid $33 to Facebook to get that order. And then, okay, I've got $10 of cost in the inventory. So there's another $10, so up to $40. And I have to pay my payment processing, Shopify payments, Stripe, whatever you're using. Let's call it 2%. So that's $2 there. So we're at 42. Then we have shipping and handling. If you're doing it yourself, fine. If you get working with a third-party logistics or a 3PL fulfillment warehouse, let's say you're paying $2 for the handling and another $10 for shipping. So that's 12, we're up to $54. So, and then if there's any commission on top of that. So I'll just forget the commission for now. So we're in this scenario, you've got a $100 sale and you've paid $54 in all those costs that I've listed. So you have $46 left to run the company, to pay overhead, to pay wages, to pay for software, to pay for an office if you have an office. And, that's pretty important to know. So when you're growing a company, of course, you want to be scaling as fast as you can, meaning getting as many orders per day as possible. And of course, at the highest net revenue or profitability on the orders. But you also have to consider your overhead. So there's quite a few financial calculations that go into this. But just at the basics, knowing what your costs are for the product, the shipping and handling, and your advertising is going to, this forecasting helps prevent just blindly going into a company or a project without knowing those. Even yesterday, I had a call with a guy who's quite young and inexperienced, and he's throwing all these ideas at me. It's like, this product looks cool and this is trending. And what about that? And I'm like, cool, cool, cool. Write those down. But I could hear in his voice and the way he's talking, and I've seen this with other people, they get stars in their eyes and get excited, which is a beautiful thing. And I encourage it. And then I say, well, let's put some boots on the ground, numbers, hard realities, numbers and figures into this to analyze the feasibility of it. And it's not a crystal ball, but it's the closest thing you're going to get when you look at the numbers I've just mentioned, and you factor in, if this is my funnel and I'm selling at this price and these are my costs, and someone buys, what's quite typical in supplements or any consumable product is we have a sales page and we offer either 1 unit, a 3-pack, or a 6-pack. And of course, we wanted people to take at least the 6-pack or sorry, the three packs. Like the middle offer is the thing we really want to push people towards, because if they're only taking one unit, our profitability is significantly lower, and often we're losing a bit of money on the one because of the high ad cost. So that's part of the strategy that we're looking at. So when I write my forecast and do my spreadsheet, I look at those and I see the projected profitability on the one, the three, and the six. And then I'll build out like a 12-month forecast. This is how much we're expecting to spend each month on advertising. And of course, it's scaling up. And then I put in my benchmarks for conversion rates, cost per clicks, average order value. Those are like the main KPIs if you're doing online marketing that you need to be aware of and be paying attention to. Your cost per click, and the opposite of cost per click is your earnings per click. So you got CPC versus EPC. And then you're looking at your CAC, which is customer acquisition costs, or some people also call it CPA or cost per acquisition, same thing. And you're comparing that to your average order value. And as long as your average order value is higher than your CAC, that's a general indicator to say, well, I'm not losing money. As long as, again, like I said, you consider those other costs, the product cost, the shipping and handling, payment processing, and any commissions that you're paying to your team or your agency that you're working with.
That's the necessary evil, which sometimes it can become emotional, especially if you're scaling quickly. Some companies you can go from 6 figures per month to 7 figures to 8 figures per month in just a short amount of time. And then when that happens, it's easy to scale your team and then scale your marketing budget. But it almost always comes down to sobering reality is looking at the numbers. And it's not just looking at the numbers, but the numbers will always tell the truth. Even if we're riding the high of a 9 week campaign or a launch that's doing 7 figures plus in revenue, or if we're riding the high of optimizing a bunch of stuff that was on the back burner or closing new partnerships or launching new products, it always does come down to the numbers. And it's some of the best marketers, the ones that are extremely high profit margin, that's the essence of direct response is knowing the data. And it's really important to know not just the ROAS, but earnings per click, cost per click, AOV, and lifetime value, and all these things. But what numbers to monitor? And it is that profit loss, which is always going to, at the end of the day, give us the bottom line numbers of how much money we're really making versus how much we're spending. And for many entrepreneurs and marketers, it's the last thing we think of. It's most of, I mean, not everyone, but definitely over 50, 60% don't want to sit there and crunch all of their numbers, at least not necessarily in the marketing department or the marketing and sales, the creative departments aren't going to obsess over the numbers. I mean, good direct response marketers should have at least one or two people obsessing over that. That's what direct response marketers, direct response copywriters do. But it is very uncommon. I mean, it is very common for people to overlook those little things, and that can make the difference between making 7, 8, 9 figures per year versus knowing you're doing 7, 8, 9 figures per year with no profit. And believe it or not, I've seen that a couple times throughout my career, 10 years to date. I've seen maybe one or two times where companies are doing 7 figures per month and none of it is profit. In fact, they're in the red because they ignored the data, and that the numbers give that kind of the feedback, the data on our data driven marketing decisions as well.
Yeah.
I guess one last thing I wanted to ask you about is your perspective on branding in general. So what is your approach if someone, there's the marketing copywriting side where branding, if it's the obsession over branding and it doesn't drive revenue and doesn't drive sales, then we're overly obsessed over branding. But that's the performance marketing side. But I was curious to hear your perspective on, branding. If how much time do people should spend on logos, designs, even labels on products? How much time should they spend on the language, the words of content? What is your perspective on branding in general, especially for e-commerce?
Mm. Yeah. So I'll talk about branding, and first I'll say what it isn't. People will think brand and they'll unless they've spent a lot of time like thinking, meditating, and understanding it, and even being in it, brand is misconstrued as just being it looks pretty. Oh, I've got a nice logo and the colors are good and it looks nice. Everything we're doing is about developing a relationship with a audience, with a potential buyer who doesn't know us yet. Another way of saying that is we're building trust. If at any point in the experience that the potential buyer doesn't feel trust, whether that's from the brand, the aesthetic, the packaging, the wording, the vibe, which is a non-measurable word, but just describe how kind of people have a feeling about it. Branding is important because if it's done right, it helps with building the trust. So I have in my work, I'm starting to distill my thoughts and my teachings into a simple model that I'm referring to as the golden hierarchy of business needs, which is a play off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's a simple triangle or a pyramid. And at the bottom of that, I've got three sections, like on one layer, brand, marketing, and product. Well, to me, branding is your why. It's your story. And from when you have a product that is connected to a story, especially a personal story, and that's what activation is it the brand came from Ian's personal experience. He had a need, a health need, a need to reclaim his health and get healthy. And that drove the brand and still drives the brand. It's a very powerful message. So brand is not, hey, I got to go to Fiverr, Upwork, or anywhere and just get a logo just to have it. And oh, that name sounds cool. What you're doing is you need to tap into the psychology of your market. And then that goes to, well, who is my market? Who is my customer? Who is Kathy, the 45-year-old woman who lives in New York and she has two kids and a husband, and like all those, what's often referred to as the customer avatar or your ideal customer profile. Actually knowing who your person is that you're selling to is very important. That's part of the brand. So when I work with professional branding agencies, which I do extensively, they're not just making a logo. They're the logo is a manifestation and an expression of the core story of the business. And brand is a one word that encapsulates many parts. So they create a brand guide, which is driven from a communication strategy, which is digging into who the customer is, what their pain points are, what their frustrations are, what makes them cry, what makes them feel joy, like all those things. There's many, many questions in there. And what I've observed is, and I believe this is happening now, the internet's been around as long as it has, and go back 20 years, it's very much evolved and matured, or you could say the world in general online is more of a sophisticated market. They've seen a lot of the BS. They've seen things that, or they bought products that promise the world and deliver terrible results. So a good brand is a big part of having a successful business if provided you do it right. Because you can go and spend $150,000 easily with a big fancy agency and not hit the mark. You could spend 30 or $50,000 with a good agency that knows what they're doing, that has people with heart and soul who have a special talent of tapping into the essence of and I'm speaking from direct experience. One of my clients in particular had that experience where they went to a big fancy branding agency and spent a significant amount of money and got an okay looking brand, but it wasn't capturing the heart and soul and spirit of the founder, but not just the founder, of course, but what that business was meant to be. And now I'm seeing, because I brought them to a branding agency that I trust and I've worked quite extensively with, and I'm seeing the results of that coming through, where even the name of the brand had to be changed because it has an impact. It's not that name A versus name B is going to make a difference between $1 million company and $100 million company. No, but it will have an impact on the whole thing. So it's like you're creating a masterpiece, you're painting a beautiful painting, and you can get by with, some mistakes on it, but those mistakes are seen and it lowers the value of what you're creating. So in a word, just to summarize it, you're trying to create trust, and the brand package with the product, with the marketing, those three things combined are your foundation. And if you don't build on a solid foundation, you could bring in amazing copywriters and have really good copy, and great, you can sell some product, but you're not going to have near the success as if you do all the things to the best that you could possibly do it.
That's a great perspective. I mean, that is in a nutshell, what it is. And the difference was, I think when you're with activation products and, working with Ian, it was telling a story, which was one of the most actually the rewarding or driving the sale forward is when you really believe it, let alone had a health struggle that you turn into, seven-figure business. So that's a different form of branding when it's like you're tapping into your own personal health struggle to start your own company, and then tapping into your own personal health struggle to select and create new products, and then using those struggles to build your driving voice, and then the whole, taking that story to the product and the company. But that's essentially that is, it's always been that blurred line between direct response marketing and direct response copy versus branding, where it is, in my opinion, and many DR marketers and probably you as well, it is obsessing over being necessary. I mean, with for lack of a better term, pretty in a way. So if someone comes to you, is interested in talking about some of your services, e-com companies, what is your process for? What is typically your process? Do you hop on a call? Do you diagnose some of their? Do you ask them for data or links to look at?
Hmm. I will always start with a discovery call. And of course, I'm going to say, oh, well, let's look at your product, let's look at your current website, and definitely those data points I mentioned earlier. What does your product cost? How much you want to sell it for? And I also ask them, of course, where do you want to go? What's your goal? Do you want to create $1 million company, five, 10? And yes, everybody says we want more money, but where do you think you can get it to? And also, uh, I help them with that to say, well, also what's possible. Is this product likely to be a $5 million a year or a $50 million a year business? Do you want to sell your business in the future? So in that model I was mentioning earlier, the hierarchy of business needs at the very top, there's a decision to make. Do you go left or right? Do you want to exit your business, or do you want to legacy your business? Do you want to build it to sell it, or do you want to build it to keep it and pass it on to family members or a trusted friend or colleague? So knowing I look at the present, and I do look at the past as well. Like, where have you been? What have you tried? What hasn't worked for you? Like I mentioned, some clients, I tell them, how much did you pay to get here? How much money have you already spent to get to this point? And what did you spend it on? And I don't do that to make them feel bad, just to look at, where they've been and what they're willing to try, because that's a pretty important factor is a business owner, do they have the capital to keep going and invest in the right places? And do they also have the willingness to endure the work, and also it's painful to spend money and not have a result. So that mental fortitude and resilience to keep going is, because I'm looking for that as well. And I don't want to work with just anybody. And I really I can't. I don't have, the time or the capacity to work with like 20 or 30 clients the way I do, because I'm very high touch, or high involvement. I really get immersed into their business, and even like I like falling in love with the client's work. Not necessarily as much as I would if it was my own company, but I love to know that the people I'm talking to have a big heart, that they care about their customers and their product. And then I can get behind that. I can back that, because selling a generic product, or even a product that was created on the idea of, I just want to make money and this is trending, is quite deflating. So once I determine that this is a good potential fit, and like they have all the green flags that mean that they're worth my time to work with and invest my energy into, then I explain more of my process, and lay out a strategy for them and say, this is roughly what it's going to cost in time and money, and do you want to go for it? And then if it's a yes, it's a yes.
Cool. So if someone wants to get in touch with you or just at least get to know you a little more about kind of how you operate or what's going on in your neck of the, serving clients in that neck of the woods, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Mm. Yeah. The easiest way, of course, is just simply my website. That's anthonyclark.com, and Clark does not have an E on it. And I've got quite a few social accounts. I don't post very often, but I'm on like pretty much any, like X, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. It's Anthony M.G. Clark. That's M.G. as in Mike Golf Clark. And it just, yeah, fill out the form on my website and I'll get in touch with you.
Sounds good. And I'll drop that info in the description. Well, thanks for joining us. I think that was very, reverse engineering the path to success for marketing isn't always the same. And when you look more at the operational and, dissecting data, it can be a little bit more intricate than most people like to think, especially when it comes to launching and scaling products online. So appreciate your time, Anthony.
Well, it's been good to be here.
Thanks again for joining us. We enjoyed having you sit there right next to us in your virtual seat, and I hope the feeling was mutual. Don't forget to rate, share, and subscribe to the Authority Marketing Podcast. And if you'd like, check out some other episodes we got. Stay tuned for our next one.